Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Andrew Bartram, Erik Mathy and Graham Vasey of the North. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, Erik.
Simon, how are you?
Very well. And hello, Graham.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well. And long-term listeners would understand that reference because episode 2 of the Large Format Photography Podcast was with Graham Vasey. And Graham Vasey of the North was the title of that podcast. And we said that we wanted to talk more to Graham. And after, what was it, almost 4.5 years, we've got him back that fast. So welcome back, Graham. It's great to see you again. I say see you again. This is the first time I've actually seen you because we didn't have cameras last time, although at this moment I don't have a camera, which most people who know on this podcast, I don't have a camera. I get moaned about it every time, but there you go. Sorry about that. But it's great to see you, Graham.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be back. Yeah, it's lovely. And I don't think 4.5 years really, because a couple of those years were COVID years and they don't really count.
You're right.
So they're just...
Yeah, it's like a black hole.
Out of history. So it's only been like a year, 2 at max. So yeah,
that's it. Yeah, we'll move those years swiftly on.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do, like we did last time, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, and Andrew's going to give an in-depth introduction that I've just dropped upon him. So over to you, Andrew.
Right. Well, thanks for that, Simon. It's always good to be prepared. So, Simon and I both listened to episode 2, much against my better judgment, really it was. And Simon shamed me into listening to it by suggesting I wasn't at all professional. And so I felt I had to go back. And I'm glad I did, because actually it was a whole lot better, show 2, than I remember. We did cover a load of ground, and we'll see what we can do today. We'll focus on some of the areas that we spoke about. But Graham, we spent a bit of time. I don't think we were really in jest at the beginning. We were genuinely curious last time because you still describe yourself after all these years as a fine art photographer working in the northeast, and something else on Instagram. It says traditional. Oh yes, fine art photography and printmaker in the northeast of England, using traditional photographic processes to create unique contemporary artwork. So that's, I think, pretty much how we introduced you last time. I think you explained you had a background in commercial photography, and so you really wanted to differentiate yourself and go down more of the sort of creative path and relationships with the landscape, different alternative materials, and that's what a fine art photographer is, somebody who separates himself really from that commercial world and is pursuing a more artistic bent. That's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah. So yes. I did a couple of years stint as a photography assistant, working with a couple of photographers in Newcastle, Manchester, London, Leeds, London, Leeds, but most of it was quite monotonous. Things like art catalogs and things like that, doing pictures of lampshades and stuff like that. So I really wanted to come back to where I was from and reconnect to the landscape which I grew up with. And so that's kind of my big drive and my sort of what pushing forward my work really is my surroundings and the landscape.
So anybody who looks at your Instagram, and Instagram remains the best place to see your more recent work or your work in total, Instagram.com, Graham_Vasey_photography. All of those links will be, of course, in the show notes. Show notes. We'll see that you have a very unique look to your work. And this is in part down to the use of silver gelatin, liquid emulsion, so liquid emulsion painted onto watercolour paper, I think, in the main. So we can perhaps start by exploring that a little bit more for listeners, because we did touch on it, but we didn't really sort of delve into both the whys and wherefores, the mechanics of the process, how you got into it, what you find works, what you find didn't, explaining what it is, why you use it. But, have you been using liquid emulsion constantly since we last spoke over the last 4 years? Is it been a constant for you, or have you been doing other things?
Yes. No, I mean, I still do more functional printing still, a little bit, and salt prints as well. I do still do quite a few salt prints, but my work is through this.
Okay, let's start there and then go back into detail. So, we spoke briefly before we went live about a book that both you and I have, and if listeners can get a copy, it's well worth getting hold of if this is an area you want to dive into. It's called Silver Gelatin, A User's Guide to Liquid Photographic Emulsions by Martin Reed. That was who we were trying to remember his name, wasn't it? Martin Reed and Sarah Jones. Certainly Martin Reed was one of the guys who was possibly a founder of silver print. He was certainly heavily involved in silver print. So this is like the Bible, I suppose, really. It's, as far as I know, probably the only book dedicated to this process. But tell us your story with liquid emulsion and why you use it, how you use it, and all those good things.
It was sort of a technique which we explored a bit when I was at college, at Newcastle College. One of the tutors, Graham Vasey, was really good at alternative processes, and we did a lot of work like using cyanotype and liquid emulsion, lift printing as well. I had a tutor as well, Jackie. She was fantastic. She did a lot of like gum prints and things like that as well. So I had really lots of information at hand. So I did bits then, and I didn't really do anything with it for a long time. Then maybe almost be 15 years ago now, I was inspired by the oil painters and things in the gallery that represents me, Gallerina, which is in Darlington. So I became friends with a couple of abstract landscape painters and things, one Paul Denham. And I got really sort of interested in how brush looks and things, how it...
Okay, well, sorry, we had a few technical issues there. It's clearly a long way up north, and the telephone wires get a bit stretched all the way up there. So either that or Graham's on some cheapo internet provider. So Graham, sorry, you were explaining, just to summarize, if I've got it right, you went down a route of liquid emulsion because it giving you that sort of imperfect look. It fits in well with the sort of work that's represented at the gallery, fits in well with how you feel with the landscape. You'd explored various other alternative methods of printing at college, and over the last 10 years you've been largely working with this process called liquid emulsion. And I was just saying before we had to pause that there is a really good book called Silver Gelatin, A User's Guide to Liquid Photographic Emulsions by Martin Reed and Sarah Jones. If you can find yourself a copy online at a reasonable price, it's well worth getting. But Graham, tell us then, what is liquid emulsion? Let's ask the real basic question. What is liquid emulsion? What do you do with it? How do you use it? How does it work for you? So give us a liquid emulsion 101. That's probably what I need to know.
Yeah, sure. So basically, liquid emulsion is a silver gelatin-based emulsion, very similar to what you have already pre-coated onto your photographic paper, but it's in a gelatin form which can, when you warm it up, becomes liquid again. And this allows you to paint it onto multiple different surfaces. So not only can it be painted onto paper, it can be painted onto glass, onto like shells, stone, wood, all different kinds of materials, plaster. And once it's been applied under red light conditions, it basically turns whatever surface into a photographic medium. So then you can print on it as if it was a piece of photographic paper. So by using different mediums to paint it on, whether you can use rollers, you can use brushes, different textured brushes, all kinds of things. You can apply different textures to the final print that you're creating. You can do it very carefully and create something that almost looks like a commercially available piece of photographic paper, or you can become more abstract with it and become a bit more expressive with larger brush marks and things. So yeah, basically it's almost like photographic paper in a bottle. You could imagine, if you can imagine that.
And
so
who makes it these days, Graham?
there's a couple of different companies that make it. Rolly, they produce a number of different products, including a multigrade version. There's also a company which has just come back from the brink, I think it'll be relaunched, called Forte, and they've started to create a new one as well, which was based on one of their old photographic emulsions, which was very, very good. And then there's another version which was one that's been around for a long time, called Black Magic. That's still going. I think you still can get hold of that. And there's another one by Photo Speed, which is very good. I think that's the same one that used to be able to buy at Silverprint. They used to call it SE1. I can't remember what the abbreviation is, but yeah, they can. And the one I use mostly, because it seems to work well for me, is the Foma version, which is the same company that make Foma Pan and photographic papers and things.
Okay, so you're primarily painting this liquid emulsion onto watercolor paper, I think, aren't you? And
yes,
this is a very confusing area for anyone dabbling in getting started into any alternative process, because there's a lot of confusing and conflicting information about different types of paper, and some quite, on the face of it, complicated terminologies that are used about the type of paper that might be, whether it's sized, which means coated in something to stop the liquid emulsion soaking too deeply into the fibers, whether it's unsized. I mean, if one's starting out, is there a paper that you'd recommend, or
so a good quality, what the class is watercolor paper. So all watercolor paper should basically say it's sized, and that basically stops when people are painting it stops the pigments from bleeding and just becoming like blotting paper. It also gives it a lot of strength and stops it from shrinking and expanding too much as well as you wet it, which is really important as well, because in this process, just like you are doing any kind of conventional darkroom wet print, you need to develop it in developer, fix, stop and fix, and then of course wash as well to wash out all the chemicals. So it has to be quite strong. So quite often I use there's quite a few different companies out there, but Bockingford or those kind of papers we can get from really any art shop. Also, a lot of these are good because they're archival, they're acid free. So there's no chemicals in those papers which could affect the long-term life of your print kind of thing. It's not going to degrade. It's going to degrade your print. And it's again, if you're depending on the surface that you're applying it to, say if you're on wood, some woods have the pH levels different. So you got to prime that surface to stop the emulsion from sinking in too deep, as you were saying, and also stop anything in the wood from attacking the emulsion.
So most off-the-shelf watercolor papers, if I walked into WH Smith and bought, I think Bockingford might even be available in WH Smith, for example. WH Smith, for our American listeners, is a high street sort of newsagent, bookseller, general art supply, that sort of thing. That's already got. They generally come sized, do they? Yes, yeah. That's otherwise it would just be like. I'd say like blotting paper. Yeah, or Hahnemühle, I know, do what they call a platinum rag paper for for alternative processes. I know because I've had some before, and I think that must be sort of unsized.
I don't know actually.
No, I think it probably is.
It would be to a certain extent, because that also the sizing, I say, quite often helps give it strength for the processes.
Okay,
washing it things.
So one of the sizing materials you can use would be
you can use diluted PVA glue.
Yes, I've used that. But what's the other one they use? The one that can be used in cooking?
What's some kind of like cornstarch?
But the common it's not.
I can actually use food grade gelatin, I think.
Gelatin, yeah. So that's the one where you mix it with water, don't you, and let it bloom? Is that the term? Bloom?
Bloom, yes, yeah.
And then paint it on, or Yeah,
usually you would let it bloom, let it cool down and set, and then warm it back up and then coat it.
Do you ever use any of those substances? Right. But you don't use any of those sort of additional sizing materials in your work? Okay.
I never have. I have once. I usually buy a paper in large, 1.5 wide by 10 meter long rolls. Well, cost effective. And I did buy some cheapy stuff once that wasn't from a brand that I recognised, and it just felt a bit. Literally, hooks started coming off the print while I was trying to like print it and things.
There's a couple of things really from what you've mentioned about the mechanical nature of the process. So it's got to be able to withstand the kind of abuse of developing, fixing, and washing. So that's both the material it's coated onto and the strength of the paper, but also papers come in different thicknesses, don't they? Marked up as in grams or something.
Yeah, and you get different surfaces as well, so different roughness. So the usually one I use is is knot. Which is kind of like a softly patterned surface. It's not too heavy, but you can get so much completely smooth. And I usually use 300 gram,
right? Yeah,
weight paper, which is kind of like a medium. But you can get stuff which is 400 or so, almost like cardboard, really. Or you can get stuff which is quite thin, which is down to I think 120 gram or 150 gram.
And does the texture of the paper, does that affect whether or not the emulsion is going to start coming off during the washing process, for example? Have you found?
Not generally, no, but it does affect how it how when you brush it on, how it applies.
Yeah.
So the rougher the texture, the more likely you are to get streaks and voids, and you get little sort of textural marks coming through from the paper itself.
And you don't mind that, though, do you?
No, I don't. I quite like that. I purposely go for that.
Okay.
But say if I was doing a salt print where I wanted to be more physical contact, like a smoother contact between the negative and the sensitized paper, the coated paper, I'll quite often use a smooth finish watercolor paper, and usually quite something a bit lighter, like a 140, 150 gram, so it'll make better contact.
Okay. Yeah. So we're coating this in the darkroom under some kind of dim red light conditions, I guess. Yeah. I think a dim red light would probably be the way to go, because a brown one in that sort of multi-contrast spectrum could be unsafe. But I think red would probably be the way to go. Are you putting the paper onto like a sheet of glass or something to aid the coating, or?
I usually stretch it onto wooden boards. So so in the same way you do if you've ever seen someone do watercolor painting, you wet the paper first, and then you use like a water soluble gum tape, which is like you damp the tape and you stick it down flat when it's still wet on the board. It dries and the paper shrinks and dries perfectly flat. And then that becomes you can use then that as your almost like an easel. So I have a couple of big 10 mil or 12 mil MDF boards. One's 1 meter 10 by 90 centimeters. One's a little bit bigger, which I stretch my paper onto a big sheet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Brilliant.
So you're actually physically soaking the paper for very long, or just wetting it lightly, or?
So just damping it so it becomes pliable and it'll lie flat.
It's a similar method to one I've used quite successfully for drying fiber prints in the darkroom on sheets of glass using that sticky gum tape, because it's one of the, unless you've got a heat press, it's one of the only methods of drying prints so they've become completely flat. But then you have to cut away it goes all crinkly, doesn't it? You have to cut away the gum tape at the end, so you lose a bit of your edges of your print. Anyway, that's the side.
Yeah, I leave a margin around the side of the print. Because the gallery the way they like to display them is for me to rag the edges of the print anyway. So like,
like a decal, or you can get a decal cutter, can't you, to get artistic cuts on the edges?
Oh,
yeah, you can. Something else to look out for.
I'll look out for. So in a big box frame, they float them off the back of the board, so the kind of prints are kind of on all the edges are on show, if you see me, rather than behind the slip. Yeah.
So you're in the darkroom, you've stretched your paper, which is really interesting to hear that. You're then applying your liquid emulsion. So you've got a bottle of this foam or liquid emulsion. Are you heating the whole bottle up, or are you scooping some of the liquid emulsion out and heating a smaller amount up?
Yeah, so over the years, I used to just heat the whole bottle up and just pour out what I needed. But it does degrade the emulsion after a while. And so especially if you get like one of the larger emulsion bottles from foam, you can get up to like 1 kilo bottles, like tubs. And now scoop it out with a plastic spoon. It's really important not to use metal, any kind of steel, because in your brushes or your stirring implements and things like that, because the metal will react with the silver nitrate, and it'll fog it. So, so I use a plastic spoon to scoop out what I need, and then put that almost like in like a bain-marie, so like a plastic tub inside a slightly larger plastic tub filled with hot water, and then stir it till it becomes dissolved, it melts.
Okay.
And then I can just use, then I can just dip a brush into that, and that becomes my.
I know you. So you've already touched on the fact that for artistic reasons, which we'll delve into in a little bit, you're not too worried about whether you get a nice even coating. So are you using sort of horizontal brushstrokes followed by vertical, and then do you keep going over it, or do you just do one way and then the other way and call that done?
It depends on the print sometimes. Quite often I always do a vertical and then horizontal. But then quite often I try and like create more brush marks and work into the print a little bit. So if, for instance, like into the skies, to try and get some movement, some like sort of swirling brush marks and things. Okay. I'll try and to be a bit more expressive in that sense, or try and manipulate the emulsion as it dries, as I am applying it.
Yeah. So do you keep brushing it as it dries, because you can get bubbles form as well, can't you? I've noticed that. I've not done much of this, but I did have trouble with bubbles. Yeah.
Yes, you can get to, but in the cross hatches usually, and then brushing over usually get rid of the most of them.
Right.
I mean, sometimes I don't get so much problem with bubbles on the very large prints. It's the smaller ones where I start to get bubble problems, because you're applying sort of more emulsion to a small area.
Yeah, that could be it, because mine have been very small, really.
Yeah. When you get to when I do these larger prints, because I'm moving the brush around much more, it seems to dry a bit sort of flatter.
Okay. So you've coated your paper, and you then how do you? If you want to ever escape the darkroom and you haven't got a rotating door, presumably you're putting these paper in a box or something, are you?
Well, because it's already secured to a big board, I can literally lean it against the cupboards in my darkroom, and then just box in the side, cover it up with a big cloth, and then sneak out behind the curtain into outside. Right. I'll make sure as well all the doors in my hallway are shut, so that there's no just as little external light coming in as there possibly can make it. But I think as long as it's the board is away from the light and it's all covered over, I've never had any problems with fogging. So
okay, so Simon has a question for you, Graham.
Yeah, I've just to take things back a touch. I'm just thinking about those people listening that that don't really know too much about the darkroom, because you said something there about swirling the emulsion for the sky, and I think it's just worth talking about that part of the process, because it sort of indicates that you know where the sky is, but you haven't actually used the enlarger at this point. So that you're swirling something on a blank piece of paper.
All right, I see. Well, what I usually do beforehand is, once the paper's stretched, I should have said this, is I mark out the edges of my print. So I project down onto the paper from my enlarger. So what I usually do is it's a really old-fashioned enlarger I have. It's on a big round metal column, so I can swing it 180 degrees. So to get the big prints, I have to my enlarger's on the worktop. I turn the baseboard round and then swing the enlarger so it's projecting onto the floor. So the board's on the floor with the paper stretched onto it. I then can mark out the dimensions of the print just by literally pencil on the corners, and that gives me an idea of where my print will be. And then it's about a matter of because I've already measured out and worked out where the print is. Then it's a bit of sort of imagining, trying to imagine what proportions of sky, what proportions of land, how the flow of the image goes, and then trying to imagine what I'm doing, basically. So it's a little bit of serendipity. There's a little bit of unknown. So I never 100% know exactly how every print's going to go, because you don't really see 100% where your emotion's going. There's always going to be a little bit of a surprise in there. So yeah.
And that ultimately that adds to the look of your prints anyway. As you say, you deliberately don't make them as perfect as you can with the way that you're applying the emulsion. So where you're making those the emphasis within the print and the shape of your brush strokes not being precise, that just adds to the look that you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
One other thing, because I know that Erik has now raised his hand, so I will make way shortly. And that is,
are you going to give way to the honourable gentleman?
I will be giving way to the honourable gentleman shortly. I may have a cup of tea coming in, so it may have to wait a little bit longer. Yeah, here's my cup of tea. Thank you very much. So and that's just going back to the photograph that we used on episode 1. Was this connected? Episode two, which it was a picture of sky, and funny enough, the sky is very, very interesting because it looks like you've spilt a cup of coffee over the sky element of the landscape. It's a picture of a valley and hills, and it's got some sky in it on the Isle of Skye. And it has a coffee-coloured sky, and I'm just wondering what happened there. Was that serendipitous, or were you going for this multi-tone view?
That was serendipitous. So basically, sometimes when if you have too much of a build-up of the emulsion, it becomes quite a thick layer. And the way I develop the prints, it's quite difficult to get the stop to completely remove to all the developer. And so if there's any developer left sort of unstopped, is that the right way to describe it? Unneutralized by the stop. When it comes to fix it, it will go quite a rusty brown. So quite often, if you have like thicker parts of the prints, you have thicker areas of the emulsion, sort of a build for the emulsion on the surface of the paper, you will get these stains and I've kind of that was in the early days. I got a lot more of that, and I've kind of figured out how to minimize, if not eliminate that in the process. But there are times when I kind of want to recreate it. So it's and even I've gone to the point of using like pigments and things to tone parts of the image to recreate that in a more controlled manner where I know I can see what's happening and where it's going, sort of thing.
Well, it looked great, and that's that's why it ended up on the cover. And I've got to make a confession to all our listeners now, which is going to be quite shocking. But that photograph was not actually taken with that large format camera. It was taken with your Hasselblad, which you told us at the time. But it was a case of I'd done the artwork by then, and I was thinking, but that's a great photo. I want to keep it. So we just thought, I know, we just won't tell anyone. So
the whole show's built on a lie.
Exactly. Yeah. So there we go. Erik, over to you.
Actually, I got a bunch of questions, but I'll keep the first ones to the actual preparation process, and I'll ask other questions later. But what's the largest one of these prints that you've done? I mean, if you're swinging the enlarger off the table and projecting it onto the floor, let's start with what's the biggest print like this that you've done, and how much liquid emulsion do you go through for like a print this size? Especially like, oops, well, that was a mistake. I guess I have to do that again. You going through gallons of this stuff, or
it's not as bad as you think. Actually, it can cover quite a lot of each print. Say the average size is probably between 80 by 70 centimeters, or 1 meter by 70 centimeters kind of scale.
Okay,
and that's kind of the average. The biggest one I've ever managed to do is, I think, 1 meter, about 90 centimeters, or so 1 meter by 1 meter 10. And I don't know how much. Can't remember what that is in inches. But then at that point, I'd hit the ceiling with my enlarger, and I basically, to develop these, I created a big tube, made from a piece of 8-inch drain down pipe. What you have in the side of the house. With inspection caps, epoxy resin onto either end, so you can unscrew them and slide the paper in and pour chemicals in. And I think that's 1 meter, or just over 1 meter long. So that's as much paper as it could just roll up and shove in.
I say, which is not small for the Americans out there. That's about 3 foot by 3 foot.
Oh yeah.
Which is, I got you.
Yeah, so
it's giant. I remember
4 foot by 3, then, so roughly about.
Okay. Yeah, which is big. I remember there's I'll look up his name and put it in the show notes. But there's a gentleman here in the Bay Area who's using color paper, and he just bought a giant roll of it. Like the industrial size roll. They're like 6 foot, so 2 meter, or so.
Yeah.
In width, and he converted his trailer, a tow behind trailer, into a giant pinhole camera. And he would just tape these massive sheets of color paper inside the trailer, and then he would go and take these ridiculously huge pinhole images, and then he had a massive, just like you do, but he used like these massive metal tubes, and I saw these video of him developing it, and he just had a warehouse space that he worked in, and he would just like walk back and forth like 15 feet each direction, like 5 meters each direction, just rolling this huge tube, stop and roll it back. Just ridiculousness because of just how big the paper was. And he had a warehouse space. So I was curious, like in your flat, how much space you have it's a print.
It's actually it's my dad is a king photographer, and that's how I kind of got into photography myself. So my dad and my mum and dad allowed me to convert what was my old bedroom in my mum and dad's house, my parents' house, not far away from where I live now, into a dark room. So, but it's only it's what is it about? It's not very big. It's probably 12 foot by 12, something like 10, something like that. Yeah. It's not massive. It's not a massive space. That's why I kind of made the roll. So I've got like a 6 foot long dark room sink, and that almost butts up against the door on one wall. And then the other wall, I've got about 10 foot long of cabinet space with 3 enlargers on it. So yeah. And then there's a little gap where I shove loads of rubbish. So
I hear that. And then for, when you're talking about tinting some of the prints, have you ever thought about, or do you ever like because the first color photos were just they're either bichrome or trichrome, but basically they were in some ways they're also hand painted. Have you ever thought about, as you're finishing these prints, just going back in and painting colors on them, or doing anything for colorization?
I've done a couple of I've been working on this series called Dane for a number of years, which is all based on folklore, and they're all using 5:4 sheet film, and they're all in camera multiple exposures. But I've been experimenting with those using like red tints and orange and different colours and things like that. More sort of a general wash rather than tinting sort of individual things within them. Like you did with like when you see those black and white pictures with where red, the crane's painted in red again, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
More sort of general washes and stuff, trying to get different effects.
Cool. I like it. And if nobody else is continuing with questions, I certainly have more questions. Well, my real question actually would... Go ahead. No, after you, Andrew.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand then. I forgetting myself. Yes. I'm sorry. Simon or Erik, do you have any more questions on this we've sort of covered this process up to sort of selection of paper, coating, planning where the image is going to be projected? Because I think folks listening would realize by now this isn't like cyanotype or salt prints where you're contact printing the negative against the paper. This is you're projecting the image from the enlarger. So we've covered that. Do you guys have any more sort of general questions on the mechanics of it?
No, not right now.
No.
So Graham, what about so you choose this method because it's not perfect.
Yes.
And I think you said something back in show 2 4 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, or maybe even a year ago, depending if you count COVID or not, that this fits in well with how you, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't quite remember the exact word you used. You said something about, or something like, your relationship to the local environment where you live and how this process works with the kind of images that you produce. So I'd just like you to expand on that sort of idea, really, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. My dad was a history teacher, and he's always been extremely passionate about archaeology, and so growing up I had a lot of books in the house which were to do with like abandoned villages and how the landscape's been made and things, because you got to remember that especially in the northeast, the landscape, and like most of England really, the landscape's always been sort of created by man. It's kind of, or at least man has been symbiotic within the landscape. It's created part of it, but part of the landscape's also dictated what people can do. So around here there's been a lot of heavy industry, a lot of mining, a lot of quarrying, and all those have left indelible scars on the landscape. And some of these have been going on for centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years. And nature's reclaimed those to a certain extent. So my pictures try to reflect that. So I try to look at the landscape as a historical document almost. So I like the idea that working to these images created these textures that kind of help expose that. So you're kind of looking just beyond just the picture that you see. You're looking, this beyond the kind of like the picturesque, perfect landscape, which is kind of quite often is depicted by a lot of landscape photographers sometimes. But it's a bit more. There's more going on. There's the elements that this is a working landscape, or has been a working landscape. So so that's kind of one of the reasons why I kind of like it, is because it lets me express more than just a straight picture, if you see what I mean. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Because if it's just a straight landscape. I mean, it's just a straight landscape. Not that there is such a thing.
No,
but,
I love the straight landscapes. They're not. But yeah.
But there's an undercurrent to it. There's a reason for the images, and it sort of veers a little bit into fine art documentary, if you will.
Yes, yeah, and that's where this Dane series came from. Is kind of there's a lot of landscape you cannot see; it's invisible, but it's recorded in place names and folklore, the stories of the landscape and things. So I wanted to create a narrative within my pictures. So I started double exposing to try and get these kind of depths. So using still life with landscape and etc. to kind of create more to show the stories and the history of the place, rather than, again, because so much of it is just like a name on a map and spoken words, right, or things being written about. It's difficult to interpret that in just one picture.
Do you ever dig into the actual, just out of curiosity, because you just talk about like looking at the names on a map, do you ever actually dig into like the history of those names, or maybe where the different parts of those names came from?
Definitely,
out into the piece?
Yeah, definitely. I do a lot of research, a lot of before I go to these places. So I usually do look at online, look at historical books that I have. So there's about the folklore, and about history. So I've done a lot of research into like the mining of the northeast and the lead mines of Teesdale, which is very close to where I live. There's a big area called Cockfield Fellerby, which me and Andrew visited a long time ago, and that's really a unique place. And it was so heavily ravaged by coal mining during the 19th century that they didn't think it was worth anything, so they never enclosed it. It was kept as like a common land for the village. So the villages still have these things called stints. So they have like a right to use the common land to rear their sheep and their horses on. So you get all these really crazy shanty kind of sheds all over, plotted all over the place, and then you got prehistoric ditches, and then you've got these medieval bell pit coal mines, which are like some of the earliest coal mines ever in the UK. So you go, and it's the same way again near where Andrew lives. There's a place called Grimes Graves, and it's all these what they call bell pits. And what these in the Neolithic, they were digging down into the vertical shaft down into the chalk to find flint to turn into axes, and they left these very defined marks in the landscape, which are like, it looks like a donut with a hole in the middle, like a ring donut. And this was the kind of, when they dug down, they just put the spoil around the hole, and they did it in exactly the same way they dug for coal on this fell in the Middle Ages and early modern period, sort of 16th century. So you have this really kind of very complex landscape, which, so I do an awful lot of research. I love finding old books as well, like little journals and things, and natural history books and things of the area, because you find lots of little first-hand stories and things, and little snippets of folklore, which some have been sort of lost over the years.
Cool. I found working photographically in the fens, I developed much more of a connection with the landscape so it rang a bell, really, what you're saying. So I started, reading books on the draining of the fens and the history and the violence that went on as the Dutch tried to drain the fens, and that sort of, I guess it's the same for you where you are. You go out into the landscape armed with all that knowledge sort of floating around your head, and it's not lost on you, is it, when you're out in the landscape trying to make the work?
Yeah, exactly.
It informs the way you work.
Yeah, exactly, and it gives greater depth and meaning to what you when you do see something, and like those isolated farmhouses and things which you like, and cottages which you photograph, Andrew. You kind of can't help but be drawn to those kind of things, because you just wonder about what was life like to live there. What did those people do? why do they choose to live there, and why do they choose not to live there anymore? And it's like, again, in Teesdale and Weardale near me, there's dozens and dozens of abandoned farms, like hill farms, which are just you can almost look like you could walk into and live in. Some are just piles of ruins, but you can't help but imagine what people's lives were like and how they lived and things. So yeah, it really gives a little poignancy to the landscape.
Yeah. So what was I going to say to you? Sorry, I just got distracted by Simon or somebody messaging me. Maybe it was Erik. Very unprofessional. Goodness me. I don't know what I was going to say now, but I'll go back to what I raised my hand for a little while ago. You mentioned Dane series, I think, and I just went back onto your Instagram and see that it's a word that's curiously spelt DAINN with some little accents on top of it. And the one image that I was looking at, and you mentioned double exposure, I think we touched on the use of ravens before, but I can't remember how much we spoke about it. But this seemed to be, for a time at least, sort of a constant theme, you and probably stuffed birds.
Yes.
And I'm looking at this image from a while ago. Raven on a post, double exposed with a tree through its body and landscape in the background. And you call it the Dane series. What just tell me a bit about that.
I've always been fascinated by the Danish culture, the Nordic culture that exists in the Dales and the Yorkshire Dales and things. So the River Tees is kind of the boundary between what was Danelaw to the south, Yorkshire, and the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Northumbria or earldom to the north. And it's really strange that on one side the River Tees you have Saxon place names or place names that sound very Scottish, like Egglesburn and things like that. And on the south of the River Tees, you still have Becks and Gills and things like that, so they're more Scandinavian in origin. And so I've always been fascinated by it. I tried to do a big project on it when, like more of a photojournalism project, trying to discover, if I could, any kind of remnants of this Nordic culture in the north. And it is kind of it was doing this that inspired me to do the Dane series, because I realized that you couldn't really, it's very difficult, if impossible, to encapsulate that in just a conventional picture. You needed to bring more elements into that picture to try and create a story. So Dane is like I think it's one of the stags on the Asda or the World Tree, and and I think it may mean death as well. So when the first ones I did were all like skulls and stuff, and then I did other things and the raven and things. It's obviously that's for Odin had his ravens and stuff, and so I had a good friend who was a taxidermist. I've got a good friend, Tony, and he would lend me stuff, basically. So, I had like a fox head that belonged to me, my mum and dad, which I used that for one called Foxwood. And the first one I did, the first ever in that series, was called Mirkwood, which was a big stag's skull and a piece of ancient woodland that's in last patch of ancient woodland in Teesdale. Really strange place. It's all boggy underground. There's lots of like birch and oak trees, which are all twisted and gnarled, and this poor, really stunted growth kind of things. And so the Mirkwood comes from William Morris, and it was kind of like his translation of an Anglo-Saxon term for the kind of the dark forest, the kind of, and he played into his work, and so I borrowed that and created this Mirkwood, and then from that I created Foxwood, and then the Raven, and then I done other ones. One was called Kirk Carrion, which is a ridge in Teesdale, which on the halfway up the summit there's a clump of trees, which was a barrow, a Bronze Age barrow, and I did a lot of research into Celtic cultures and deities and things, and I found that a lot of this in the northwest and northeast of England, they found the archaeologists discovered a lot of effigies of like a ram's-headed, rammed-horned god kind of, and so and rams, or what we call up here tups, it's still a real pride thing of Teesdale. It's still quite famous. Teesdale's very famous for its tup breeding, for these big rams that they produce. So I kind of incorporated that ram's horn into the picture. So you have this Bronze Age barrow on the summit of this hill, and then you have this ram's horn. So it kind of links back into prehistory and into what is a common, there's still a vibrant part of society and culture in Teesdale.
I think what all this how this speaks to me, and I'm sure it's coming across for the listeners, is the value in just living and dwelling in a landscape. The photographic benefits of just immersing yourself. If landscape photography, in whatever form it is your cup of tea, then immersing yourself in your local environment, researching, reading books, finding out about the past and engaging with your local environment perhaps can really reinvigorate your photography.
Oh, 100%. Andrew Sanderson actually produced a great book. I got it from my dad, and it was just about taking pictures around your own home, and such beautiful work. And it was all, and I think it's getting to know your environment and the light and how it moves and changes throughout the day is really important, I think. And I found the last 10 years, the scope of my pictures has become smaller and smaller and smaller. So once upon a time, it was always, all I wanted to do was be up go to Scotland, go to Skye, go to the Outer Hebrides, or go to the Lake District. But over the last 10 years, it's become more and more just about the landscape around me. And I think as well, once you start to go beyond past the roadside, beyond into the landscape, into that hinterland of the land and of what's around you, then you see it in a totally different way. So, because I think as well, when you go visiting as somewhere, say, spectacular as Glencoe, you can be almost, you could accidentally find yourself just following other people's tripod marks. Just taking the same pictures of other people. You need to, because you've seen a picture of something, you go, wow, that's amazing, I want to go there, and you go there, and it's very easy to think, oh, I'm just going to take that picture, and it's still going to be a wonderful picture, but it doesn't. Have you really got the best out of that landscape you could have in a way? You've
just hit upon something there that one of our very early guests, Stephen Segersby, he made very, very similar points. When I still remember it now, he would tell the tale about taking some photographs in the Forest of Dean in the UK, and he was almost like becoming one with the place that you're in, and there'd be times where if he was in that state. I mean, I'm paraphrasing really badly now. Sorry if you're still listening to this, Stephen. But if you're basically being at one with the place, and almost like with the spirits, almost with the place, then you connect in a completely different way. And I think what you're saying there is very, very similar to that.
Yeah, exactly it. And I think as well, one of the big sort of pinnacle moments in my photographic life really was I did a workshop with Bill Schwab, the American landscape photographer, to Iceland, and it was an amazing trip because it was me and Tin Rudman as well. It's going to name drop here because there's no time and Paul Hannum and things like that, and there was some amazing photographers, and we did like 10 days, did the full loop of Iceland down to Vik to Hup, and then ended up on Skalfalnes, right on the north east coast of Iceland, and But what I really learned from it, from everyone there, particularly Bill, was like how to immerse yourself into that landscape. It's not just about, he would quite often as well just put in a pair of earphones and of something and just really just immerse himself into the environment and almost shut himself and create like a story of it all and to kind of and get inspiration that way. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, one other thing there. I mean, we've not actually talked about large format as such, and that's exactly what you get with large format photography, generally speaking, unless you've got one of Steve Lloyd's Chroma snapshot cameras where you can walk around with a 4x5 camera. But it seems to me that a fast photograph with large format takes about 15 minutes for me, and in that time, you don't rush. You compose carefully, or you try to at least. But in the meantime, I think just by doing things more slowly, you just take in what's going on around you. Nowhere near to the kind of depth that you're talking about here, or Stephen Segersby for that matter, and Greg Obst as well. It's a bit of a thread going on there, Yeah, I think it just lends itself to being more open to what's going on in your environment.
Oh, definitely, yeah. You kind of make that commitment to go to that place as well, I think, and it gives you that, And then when you arrive, you can spend your time setting your camera up, and that just gives you that chance to breathe and to really soak up your surroundings and really sort of start to figure out what you're going to do. And quite often, what you think you're going to take is not what you take in the end. You kind of end up moving around a bit, trying to get that composition right. And 100%. There's something lovely about that method of just once you've got your dark cloth over you as well, and just you can really focus in on what you're doing and where you are. I can remember years ago, I was up in a place called Flushymere near me, and I was probably about half an hour just watching what was going on, waiting for some clouds to move over. And in that time, I saw a farmer driving sheep down from the hills, and like all this weather moving in, and it was just felt. And I came back down and I bumped into this farmer again, and we were just chatting about, and he was going, what did he say? I can't remember what he said now. It's a right day, this sort of thing. He was the same thing. He was just loved that environment that he was in, and it was just felt fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I think that like last time we had you on, there were plenty more things we wanted to talk about, and I think we're going to have to do what we said again, because we're pretty much coming to the end of our time for today. So hopefully in another 4.5 years we can get you back on again.
Yeah, I've got to go shortly, but it's up to you guys really. But Graham is this probably doesn't come across on his Instagram, but I've met Graham a few times. I went to his house, and he'd just taken delivery of this old cine camera. I call it a cine camera. I can't actually remember what it was. I think he wound it up or something, and I think he'd gone and bought like a load of film. I can't remember the full story, but he's since gone into the whole world of movie making. Not just movie making, but it branches off from his love and feel for that landscape, and folk horror. It's a really interesting area to explore, and I'm not really suggesting we go into it now, but and it's not really anything to do with large format, but it's just really interesting.
Right, it uses a lot of film. Yeah. So I'm currently, it's a cine camera. It is a cine camera. It's a 16mm cine camera made by Ensign, which were a British camera company, and they produced these cine cameras before the Second World War, and then I think the factory in London, where it was, got bombed, and they didn't bother to rebuild it, I think. So it's a bit of a brute. It definitely comes into the stupid stupid big camera category. I think it weighs about 2 or 3 kilos.
I think we'll explore it another time because to do it justice when I'm going to be rushing off in 5 or 10 minutes. It's not going to be worth, and it's not so much large format. But I mean, we've been speaking over this interview really about process and ideas, and I think your lurch into folk horror based in the landscape where you are, and some of the shorts that I've seen sort of tie in with your whole approach to landscape photography. So I think it's kind of valid, and it's maybe when we get you back on in 4 years' time, we'll explore that.
Definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah. So sorry for beginning that segue and then stopping you, leaving listeners.
Andrew,
that's the problem. We should. Well, I think we should do a live show. That's what we should do. We should do a live show.
Well, that's Simon wants to do lots of live shows. Well, not about live shows, but on location shows, don't you, Simon?
Absolutely.
Since you last visited me, Andrew, there's a brewery opened up in my village, so we've got a tap room.
Right. Okay. Simon.
I mean, I'll fly over to that.
I was just going to say, Erik, I know that you had other questions there, but is there anything you've got to get off your chest while we've still got Graham with us?
With a phlegm or something?
No. I mean, I am eternally curious about things like using this type of medium in the camera instead of in the dark rooms, like using liquid emulsion and various, like, say, the watercolor paper or some other medium, and actually shooting it in camera. And like sort of the mechanics and the possibilities of that, but that's a whole different, longer topic. But that's where my brain goes. Like, hey, can we make our own paper negatives?
Presumably you could, because it would probably have the same speed as ISO 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It'd probably be around there, wouldn't it? So it'd be the same. You could use it.
In that book, I think there's he does talk about glass plates, using the emulsion to coat onto black glass plates and create your own sort of dry plates, you imagine.
Yeah, but with that, I'm always terrified because with the smooth mediums like glass, you have to put the gelatin on it, and if you don't do it right, you like put it in the developer and just watch the whole thing float up off the glass, and you're like, no. And whereas with paper, theoretically, it'll sink into the paper, and the paper will absorb it better, and that whole step of having to put a gelatin emulsion, either the cheap stuff you get from the grocery store or the photo-specific stuff, is sort of skipped. And I am sloppy in most of my methodologies, so anything that I can skip that would be disastrous would be great.
Actually, that's just a technical point there, and I'm going all over the place after what you've just said there.
I do my best.
Yeah, I've got two parts to this question. When you actually expose the paper that's had the silver emulsion applied to it, is it still? Does it have to be still wet?
Or it's dried.
It's got to dry. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And then so the other part to that, because I was thinking to myself, well, actually, coating some paper, then it's how you get that into a film holder, because it's going to be substantially thicker than film. I was thinking, well, you could use a dry plate or a wet plate holder, and just find a way of just clamping it down. So
yeah,
I like the idea of that. That sounds fun.
Yeah, right. Now that I have a darker, I should probably get around to doing that.
Yeah,
Graham, can I just ask one supplementary question back onto the process before we wind down fully? It's about the washing as well, because I was never really sure when I did my last. I've got some of this black magic stuff which has been lurking in my darkroom for about 5 years, and I tested it last year and it still works, and I got a nice print. The emulsion started to lift away. I think I washed it to death. Maybe I washed it for too long, because the emulsion at one point started lifting. And at that point, I stopped the washing, and the emulsion resettled down onto the paper. And it almost looked like an emulsion transfer, not a Polaroid lift. That's what it looked like, where you lift the emulsion off and lay it onto watercolor. So I quite liked it. It wasn't what I was after. But is that because I was washing for too long? I mean, how long is too long? And should you use a hardening fixer, a non-hardening fixer? What do you do?
I generally use. The fixer I use generally is PhotoSpeed, the FX30, which is their odorless. I think it's a non-hardening.
Yeah, I think that's just a general purpose fixer, isn't it?
Yeah. And generally, I'll sort of wash it for like I would a fiber-based paper. So,
do you use any hypo clear in there to reduce the washing times?
No, generally I don't. I find as well, maybe because it's uncoated in a sense that it's like most photographic papers, even fiber-based papers, they've got a coating over the top. You've got to remember that the liquid emulsion, you've got no coating. It's literally emulsion, and then it's then the paper. So I find the chemicals wash out of it quite quickly. There's nothing to stop it.
So how long, in your experience, bear in mind you're selling these things to a gallery, so you wouldn't want to sell it to someone and then it kind of faded within like a week. How long are you? You obviously satisfy yourself that you're processing these things to as good a standard as you can because you're selling them.
Yeah.
So, what sort of fixing and washing times are you talking about?
Fixing times is usually about 4 minutes.
Right.
I'm doing it in this tube. 1 to 9 ratio. It's usually expired by the time I finish. That and then wash for at least 30 minutes to 30 minutes, something like that. Usually, because they're so big, I usually have it in the bath, and then halfway through, I empty out the water and refill it a bit, and just wash it that way. Do like kind of soaking method, if you see what I mean.
And you
had a print discolor on me, if you see what I mean.
But so do you ever get the emulsion lifting off then, like I had, or I wonder
now
the type of emulsion I was using? Sorry,
once or twice I have, to a certain extent. I didn't. The throat depends on which emulsion you get, because some emulsions you need to buy what's called a hardening agent.
Yeah.
The foamer comes with a hardening agent.
Right.
I don't think the SE one maybe having the PhotoSpeed one maybe hasn't a hardening agent involved. And basically, it's just like a liquid that you add in when it's dilute, when you've melted the emulsion, and when it's liquid, you put a couple of drops into this, and it helps it.
I've got a bottle of hardener I bought from somewhere, and I can't remember why I bought it, but I've got it, and maybe that's the same sort of stuff.
Yeah. So then it kind of makes it a bit more resilient to the washing process and things.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay. Simon. Well, in that case, I'll just do the usual things on our way out, and they are here. We go. Coffee donations. Thank you very much, because we've had a couple of donations come in, which really helps us keep the podcast going. And 2 donations. One is from Ray Agren. I think that's how you say your name, or Agren, maybe. Great podcast. I'm truly enjoying the content and the banter. Well, thank you very much, Ray. Appreciate that. And now I think we have a level 2 donor, because we have Daniel Sandland, who keen listeners will remember back in May. He also donated to us, and he's left us a message. Come on, open up. Here we go. As Erik said, hope is a wonderful thing. It's great that you came out with a new episode recently, and I'm hoping for more this year. The LFPP is the perfect companion in the darkroom and when setting up a camera. It really helps me get in the mood. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. I'm glad we help with that.
Cool.
And okay, so let's just go around the table now and just say, has anybody got any shout outs? And I'll start with you, Graham.
I think people should look up the Sustainable Darkroom, which is a fantastic group, which has lots of amazing workshops. Lo-Fi Edinburgh, which is another fantastic group, do loads of fantastic things. And to Helen, my lovely new wife.
Congratulations.
Smart man.
So, Andrew, any shout outs?
Well, I'm shamed after years of not doing this, because Erik does it all the time. I have to shout out to my my long-standing lovely wife, Julie, of 33 33. And what year is it? 33 years, maybe 34. One of those. Anyway, that's the sort of nonsense she has to put up with, my not remembering dates properly. And I think we should also shout out, before we started, we've all got slightly different versions or different books by the American Fred Picker, and we've spoken about Fred before. His name has come up in various interviews we've had, but and I've got a book called The Zone 6 Workshop, and I think Graham's got a book called The Fine Print, I think, which he mentioned if you go back to episode 2, and Simon's just bought a book, and Simon never buys books, which is also similar, but we're not quite sure whether we've all got the same book. But I think we probably all recommend books by Fred Picker, who I don't think is with us today, but I think he might be an ex-Fred Picker.
Okay.
Spirit formerly known as Fred Picker.
Yeah,
I don't have a book. Now I feel left out.
Do you? Well, you can. We can congratulate you on your recent wedding, Erik, if we haven't already. Have we congratulated you on air?
I think so. Maybe.
Have we?
I thought you were going to congratulate me on not having a Fred Picker book.
Oh, okay. Well, you can go and buy one. See if you can get a fourth different version of it.
I'll try.
Well, would you like to do your shout outs now there, Erik?
Well, as always, to my long-suffering partner and wife, now wife, crazy. She said yes. Heather, and then you two gentlemen, and Graham for coming on. Actually, it was really fun, Graham. I always appreciate our guests, but you in particular, I've sort of reignited my curiosity to try to make my own negatives, which
Fantastic.
plays into, because I've made my own cameras, I make my own lenses, and it's always sort of a goal to like make everything from start to finish. I'm not normal that way, so thank you for that. And of course, all of our listeners and community members, because you are fabulous.
Okay, and just to carry the theme on, I will thank my the current Mrs. Forster she's 33 years in on that one as well, and so doing well. She turned out well, and gave me 2 cups of tea during this podcast as well. So thank you again for that. I also want to do a shout out to Stig or Steve Starr, who I mentioned I think I gave him a shout out on the last episode, which was about 3 weeks ago, because I did a photo walk and he was there, and since that photo walk and since that podcast, he's now bought a large format camera. So welcome to the club, Steve. And I was out with him was it last week? This week, depends how you measure when the week starts. But about 4 days ago, I was out taking large format photos with Steve, and I had a really enjoyable time. So there you go. Erik, if people want to get in touch with us, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, you cheeky bastard! Large format photography podcast at gmail.com.
That's cool. And if people want to keep tabs on what the kind of things that you're doing, how can they do that?
Instagram, pretty much. As previously noted, my website is now years out of date, so it's just ErikHmathy. And
Graham, we've touched upon them a couple of times, but do you want to tell people about the best way to keep up with what you're doing, which I think is Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram. So I have my photography page, which is Graham Vasey Photography. And then there is also, but I am working on the blog, which is Graham Vasey at WordPress.com, and hopefully be able to figure out my website to get that working again at GrahamVasey.com. And you can also follow my film stuff on The Black Tor as well. So
that's it.
There we go. And you can just also look at gallerina.co.uk, which is the gallery that represents me, and they've always got usually quite an updated gallery of my pictures on there as well.
Excellent. And same for you, Andrew.
You can find me on the Twitter, on the Instagram, on the Facebook, either by my name, Andrew Bartram, or Warboys Snapper. In any of those sort of various combinations will point you into those areas. Twitter is probably the easiest place to find me. And then also every few weeks on the Lensless podcast, which is all things pinhole.
Okay, and I'm on Twitter, which again is probably the best way to find me. That's as Simonfor. That's SIMONFOR. I'm also on Threads. I've joined Threads, trying to get away from the tyranny of Elon Musk. But
it is the tyranny of Mark Zuckerberg.
Exactly. Yeah. Out of the frying pan into the fire. I mean, what world is it where we think that a Facebook-run organization is better than another one? It's I don't know.
Right.
Did you not, Simon? Did you not get into the Masturbate site?
What? Mastodon, I think you meant.
Oh, Mastodon.
Yeah. That's a slip that I think should never be deleted.
No, that's out there. We might have to put that in the title now.
I'm in.
Yeah. That's that. Strange enough, that's really thrown me. I've got a website, Simon Forster Photographic, where you can buy lots of lens caps, and I'll make custom lens caps. So if you've got a lens cap for your large format camera, and you would like me to make one for you, if you're able to take some really accurate measurements, and I mean like using calipers, then there's a good chance I might be able to make them for you. So if you get in touch with me and say that you want them, mention that you listen to us on the large format photography podcast, and I will make you a custom cap for the equivalent price of a similarly sized lens cap that I already sell, rather than doing a special price, if you understand me. So that's all good. So finally, you're listening to at this moment Two Finger Johnny, which is our theme music, our outro music by Kevin McLeod of Incompetech.com, and that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed the show, and having done 2 shows in 1 month, we're going to try and keep up a bit of pace for the rest of the year. So hopefully we'll see you soon. So goodbye.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye. Thank you very much.